Hey, everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be interviewing to get to those books that have contributed the most to who they are as a person, as a business person, a worker, a leader, whatever it may be. And there's three categories of books that I cover in this series. The first, where they're sharing a book with me I haven't read. The second, where we're discussing a book we've both read, whether specifically for this series or the series' previous life. And then the third category is when I have the author and or publisher on to discuss the book and what it is that they want to get out to the masses in that publication. Today, my guest is Jenn Grace, an award-winning author, nationally recognized speaker, and savvy publishing strategist. Jenn is the founder of Publisher Purpose, the acclaimed hybrid publishing company that gives first-time authors the secrets to getting their books written, finding an eager audience, and marking their place in the publishing world. Publisher Purpose is a certified B Corp social enterprise that meets the gold standard of socially and environmentally friendly business practices. Jenn leads ambitious authors through every aspect of writing, editing, and publishing so their book strategically aligns with their business objectives. Whether it's a business guide that shows the breadth of their work or their experience, or an emotional memoir that takes readers down deep into life's challenges, she helps authors articulate their purpose and fulfill their mission. Jenn has published the books of almost 200 business owners, entrepreneurs, speakers, and memoirists. So more diverse stories can exist in the world, and her authors can make a positive impact and achieve the recognition and success they deserve. She's the author of 7 books, including Publisher Purpose, a step-by-step guide to write, publish, and grow your big idea. Jenn has been featured in Forbes, the Huffington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. She lives in Connecticut with her family and enjoys being outside with her son, kayaking, hiking, skiing, and admiring birds and nature all around her. Jenn and I had met, I think, through Fathom series at the start of the pandemic, Create What's Needed, and then the monthly series of SIP sessions. You attend those on a regular basis. You see certain faces, kind of meet each other on LinkedIn and really get to know each other. She is a previous 2-time guest on this series in episode 4, way back when. She appeared with assistant principal at Oliver Ellsworth School in Windsor on the book I Am Me. And that book was a publication of stories written by students ages 3 to 8, representing the diversity of the Windsor community. And then she came back on in episode 5, where we covered the book that's impacted her the most at that point, the book Fascinate, How to Make Your Brand Impossible to Resist by Sally Hogshead. And here today, we're going to have Jenn to discuss her own book. So she is the author. She is the publisher. We're going to get that down to that now. So Jenn, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me for the 3rd time. I love that it's like a 3-time spot for this. This is great.
Absolutely. You're the first in that category, so I appreciate it.
Love it.
Jenn, the bio, amazing. The work that you do, amazing. I follow you on social media, on LinkedIn. I see what you do when you take your authors through the process for themselves and also interviewing them to get their faces out there. I think this is the best medium. LinkedIn is great and all. Your written work, all of our written work is great and all, but I think this adds obviously that additional dimension to it. So the bio is amazing, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in the day-to-day? What does that look like for you when you're working with your authors?
Oh, that's such a broad and open-ended question, which I love. So let's see, my day-to-day, I feel, so PYP started unofficially in 2015 through a writing program, which we still have to this day, which is a 6-month writing program. It's intense. The goal is to get people from an idea to having their manuscript written within a 6-month period of time. So that's what started back in 2015. And PYP as a publishing company started in 2016, 2017. So it's been around for long enough at this point that we have evolved to a place where I get the absolute luxury and privilege of bringing in new authors into our organization and serving the folks that we work with from a strategic standpoint. So I feel really grateful that I am not in the day-to-day weeds of the things. Thankfully, I have a really incredible team who strong project management, strong operation skills. And so that way we're able to really help our authors in an efficient way. But I get the amazing part, like even after our recording, I'll be on a call with a couple of authors of ours to just kind of strategize and brainstorm with them, like what's going to be the best strategic path for their book to take forward. So my days are a mix of things like this, where I get to have I don't like calling it a sales call because it just feels like very diminishing to even use the word
Yeah.
sales call, but like and I don't like discovery call either, because that just seems like, I don't know, I don't like that word either. So I don't have a word for it.
Yeah.
This is my co-pilot over here, Peaches.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so it's like my days kind of doing podcast or talking to current authors, or just kind of bringing in more people into our community and finding the right authors that would benefit from the way that we operate.
So who would you say would benefit from the way you operate? I referenced it a little in the bio,
Mhm.
but what does that look like? Because I can attest to, again, scrolling through social media, you have your regular show where in the same kind of platform, you're
Mhm.
interviewing people on their background, their book, their messaging and whatnot. But how do you describe that to somebody who doesn't have you regularly in their feed sharing this great content? That who your authors are, who that community is.
The one word I think kind of that encapsulates everybody is motivated. Like, we work really well with authors who are motivated to get their message out there in a bigger way. And it's not necessarily just through the form of the book. Obviously, we're a book publisher. That is the end goal. The end goal is to help you get your book out where it looks incredible, that it's well written, it's well designed, it's really intentionally created so that way it engages your reader beyond the pages and gets the reader to say, I really need to follow John on social, or I really need to join, I need to listen to the book leads. I need to, get on this mailing list. I need more of him. That is the ultimate goal, is to get the reader out of the book and into your ecosystem in some way. And the only way, or the most effective way that can happen, is when you're motivated, because your message is bigger than you. And
Mhm.
so when we are working with folks, if someone's saying, I want to write a book on how to do taxes, and they just kind of want to, like, have this book that they aren't really doing anything with, they just kind of wanted to create it just to be able to say that they created it. It's not to say that that's not a good motivation, but it's not like motivated to say, like, I need everybody to know how to do their taxes so that it eliminates the need for this type of person who's out there that might be predatory. That would be a very different kind of like motivating direction. So, we want someone who's going to, like, come into it and say, how can I think bigger? How can I, like, I came in thinking I wanted to write this book, but how can I expand that into things well beyond the book? And to me, it's like a motivation piece that kind of connects the dots.
Yeah, I can see that distinguishing factor just from LinkedIn. I mean, you see people that are putting out content, sharing things, and then when you talk to them, you can tell if it's just kind of sharing what they're doing or if they're out
Mhm.
to change the world.
Yeah.
If they really want to get that message out, that they're not just going through the motions, they're not just trying to look professional with a nice and pretty message and it posting on a regular basis, but there's something different about that tone, that desire, that want to really amplify that message, to
Mhm.
really get it out there. They share their stories and how it can impact other people.
Mhm.
And I think what I've noticed a lot about the stories of the authors that you share is they're telling their story, their experiences to help other people.
Mhm.
Like you said, they're not just writing a book and here it is. If somebody reads it, fine. They're really out there with that example, those stories. Obviously, I'm a lover of stories, and I hear so many great ones coming from the people that you're interviewing.
Mhm. Yeah, because it's not, I think that there are books out there. If we think about, like, the For Dummies series, I think that's a really good example. Those books are very intentionally created and very intentionally designed, but there's really no story around who the authors are of it. They're much more kind of mechanical in that regard,
Mhm.
because that's what they're designed to be, right? Like, so it's not even a criticism. It's just like that is how those are designed.
Yeah,
But most readers, like, you would pick up a For Dummies book because you're trying to solve an immediate problem. You could care less about the story. You just want to, like,
yeah,
get to the
yeah.
solution. But when we're reading a nonfiction book, especially leadership books or self-help books, you want to know that the author has some type of experience in whatever the thing is that they are talking about and they're preaching about. And so that's where the storytelling is so critical, because it's not just about what you know, it's about your stories that led you to the place to be able to be sharing what you know with other people. And I think that that's where readers really connect with authors, and that's when they do say, wow, I just really read this amazing book about leadership. I have to go follow John. Like I feel compelled to do that. But if you didn't tell your own story in that leadership book, it may not have the same results. They might remember, oh,
Mm,
he had a 5 model framework, but they might not be able to identify any of the 5 steps of that model or remember any detail about you because you didn't really share yourself. So what we
yeah,
know to be true is that books that sell really well and do well are the books that have the author's story just organically and naturally woven in so it doesn't feel forced, and it
yeah.
uses that story to help illustrate whatever points they're trying to make. Seems pretty common sense, but it's shocking how many books really have an omission of who the author is, because the author is like, oh, I don't want this to be all about me, but it's like, but it is about you because you're the author.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what stands out. I've said it before when people are like, you have so many leadership books that you've read. Um, isn't it the same thing? Isn't it redundant? Isn't it just repetitive? And
Mhm.
it's not, because like you said, before they go into whatever framework, and most of them touch the same kind of high points, the same kind of general lessons, but they put in a different framework, whatever theirs may be. But again, it isn't like you said, that framework. It is, they tell you the story. Sometimes they tell you the story behind each step that they're giving you. And it is from remembering that story that you understand the value of that step, where it came from. That it's not just one more person putting out a book with making it look beautiful with a pyramid or a set of tactics. That there is more depth to it. So I appreciate seeing those and hearing about them when you interview them.
Mhm. Because what I'll just say about like kind of it's like impact, and I think it's impact, right? When we're thinking about what our goal is for a book, and our goal might be that we want to impact more people. We want to get more coaching clients. We want to get on more speaking stages. It's in those stories that you start to leave breadcrumbs for the reader of,
Mhm.
oh, now I see how John works with clients, because you're sharing a story about, well, when I was doing this for X and XYZ client, this is what I saw was a pattern for them versus this client. So now it starts to like plant the seed of like, okay, John works with clients. Oh,
Mhm.
okay, John's actually talking about working with clients that are in a corporate setting. John's talking about working with individual clients. So you don't have to say like, hey, go hire me because I'm amazing. You can lead the reader to those conclusions just by the stories that you share.
Absolutely. Jen, to understand how you got to this point, can you give me a sense of how your career started, whether it was going into, higher ed? Was it going into the workforce? Was it influenced by family members? What was it that made you take those first steps in your career? And then what did that look like from them to now? Honestly, I know you've told me years ago, but it's nice to have a refresher and just so people understand who it is that's sharing their book with them.
Yeah, so I'll try to be as abridged as I can. And I actually share a little bit about this in my book, in a couple of my books. But if I go back in time, if I think about even in like high school, I'm like, what did I want to do? I was kind of like, I just need to graduate high school and I'll figure out the other steps out later. And I actually just recently found journal entries from March 28th, 1997 to July 6th of 1997. So I would have been like 15 going into 16, where they were just like in a box in my basement. And it actually mentions like talking about like college and like what I want to do. Technical writing came up in that, which I kind of remembered but didn't really remember. And I always wanted to be Dear Abby. So like writing was just always something that came very natural to me. Like I remember, taking tests where if it's an essay, I can talk my way in or out of anything. Like I give me
Mm.
words and I've got it covered. If it's something that's multiple choice, I do not do well with.
When
But
you looked at it as technical writing, when you made that mention, in terms of what?
like
Looking.
manuals, like writing like,
Gotcha.
manuals for products and things.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know where that ever came from. And I remember, like, wanting to do some kind of writing like that, but it was funny to actually see it, in my handwriting from, however many years ago that was, a long time. And so I didn't know what I actually wanted to do, so I got a communications degree in my undergrad because I'm like, "That seems broad." It's, like, all things that are really easy to me, like, it was all, like, writing classes, journalism type of things that came very natural. So I'm like, I'll get an easy 4.0 basically in my undergrad by just taking the easy path is honestly where my mind was. But then I
Mhm.
took a marketing class that I failed, which was the fun part. I got a D in it. It was my first marketing class in college. Did terrible, like the whole the 4 Ps, like the product, price, place, promotion. For whatever reason, that just did not stick. And so interestingly enough, I ended up with a graduate degree in marketing. So because like
Hmm.
it didn't stick, I did terrible, but there was something there that I was like, oh, there's something here for this. So my first job out of college was working as a marketing manager in an insurance company. I had a really terrible experience from a working in a very homophobic work environment. Still managed to last over 5 years in that company. Finally left, started consulting with other companies around how not to have homophobic work environments, basically. And so in that, I started writing books because I started doing consulting work with a number of Fortune companies. And they were like, well, do you have a book that you can leave behind? Because I would go in, I would do a training, I would do a focus group, it'd be a keynote, it'd be so many different kind of variations. And so I had a couple of clients who were like, well, do you have a book? And I'm like, I do not. I have a blog, but I don't have a book. And so I
Mhm.
was writing a daily blog for there's 500 there's over 500 posts on that website still. And the SEO in them because it came out 15 years ago is still rich. So I still get opportunities that come through that work from 2009. So it's kind of wild that actually is still kind of in motion. But it was basically I end up here because I wrote those books, and those books were really specific, really niche and narrow for a very specific audience. I was using it for client work more than anything else. But then I had everybody I knew asking me like, "Well, how did you know how to write a book?" I'm like, "I don't know. I figured it out. I don't know. I figured it out." It was the constant thing I was saying to everybody. And then finally, I was like, "Whatever. Let me put you all in a group. I'm going to teach you how to do it." And then I started teaching people how to do it. And they're like, just, I want to pay you to do it instead. And I'm like, so it was not my plan at all. However, it got me out of consulting that I was burning out from because I was tired of saying the same thing and not having people take action. And then also with books, it's amazing because people have different topics, different goals that they have, different visions. They're trying to impact different populations of people. So it's just much more exciting because no project's the same. Even though it's the same framework, it's not the same thing. So
Yeah.
it's very long-winded trail. And that is like the very kind of like clean. It was very zigzaggy. There's a lot of other things happening. That is kind of like the clean path from A to B.
What are some of those other crazy things?
Oh Lord.
We don't have to deep dive, but just like what?
Well, it was basically leaving that corporate environment, doing other types of freelancing that wasn't in this kind of consulting space. So I had a like a marketing company for a while that was doing logos, brochures, websites, things like that for like really hyper local businesses. So I had like mechanics and hair salons and like local training companies and things like that, which it was fine. But then I was like working with like really, really small businesses is hard. Like they were really like they wanted so much control and they had no money. And so it
Yeah.
was like this really, really tough thing to do. And so I was like, so I tried that path. I stopped. I took a detour of running a chamber of commerce for a while and then ended up not doing that. And so it was kind of like these other, like, just let me explore what
Yeah.
this other shiny object is, see if it fits. And then like being like, doesn't fit. I'm going to keep going on my path.
Shiny objects.
Yeah.
Yeah, little detours though.
Yeah. There's a lot of
But
little detours, but got me here.
exactly. I was gonna say it's gotta help sharpen the boundaries of what it is you want and what you
Mhm.
don't. And there's got to be skills that you picked up in those areas or sharpened in those areas that you brought back to what you're doing now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's almost I think of it sometimes like it feels like a fault, like to a fault, because my skill sets are so broad in so many ways that there are so many things that I can do, but I have absolutely no business that I should be doing them, but I can. And so it's like I've learned now to have better boundaries where I'm like, stay out of Canva, for example. Like just because you can design something doesn't mean you should be designing it. Um, but it does help because it just makes it easier to work with other people because I can empathize and kind of relate with how they might be trying to experience what I'm requesting of them.
So how is it that you really keep yourself out of other things that you may find interesting? I mean, you've made that observation that you like to go find shiny things, but do you still have that curiosity every once in a while, or is this pretty much
Oh no, my
this?
curiosity is everywhere always. It is like I think a defining characteristic of mine. That I'm curious about everything to a fault. So I have 100 questions about everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's exhausting, but I know better I just keep business and like my curiosity almost separate in a
Mm,
way. And I have
yeah.
a really amazing COO who just handles all of our operations. And so she and I have the agreement that like if I have a new idea that we have to talk about it first before I just go
Yeah.
run with something. So there's
Smart.
checks and balances. So I don't make a decision unless she's part of that decision because it will get us both in trouble if not.
So, just so does it make sense that from your childhood that this is what you're doing? I'm always fascinated by who people were as kids, whatever wonder, happiness, whatever drove them as kids, personality quirks, whatever. Does it make sense? Does it reconcile to who you were as a kid that this is what you're doing today? And how do you connect those two?
I think it does. And here's why. So if I go back in time to when I was younger, I did want to be Dear Abby. Like I don't even really remember reading Dear Abby columns, but I just remember wanting to be Dear Abby. And I think that stemmed from everybody, and this is still true present day. Everyone always wants my input or my opinion on something. Like I am the person that everyone goes to when they want to just brainstorm something, they want to bounce something off of someone. Like I am always that person. I got a text from a friend yesterday I haven't talked to in a long time, and he's like, "I need some hand holding. I need some help." And I'm like, "I'm in. Let's go get a drink."
Yeah.
So it's just who I am as a person, and it's like it's personal, it's professional, it's everywhere. And so I would imagine it was probably that from being a child and then also liking to write that when I started my blog in 2009, the way that I structured that blog, it was originally called like questions from a friend. And it was a friend of mine who was a nurse practitioner who was asking me questions around LGBTQ healthcare, of which I had no business commenting on because I have no healthcare background whatsoever. But I had that, oh, if she has this question, and I can find the answer for her and I can write that answer, then I can just
Yeah.
publish that. Other people can benefit from it. So it really kind of started off as I'm not the expert in this, but I know how to get the information for you and quote and sort, cite the right people for it. So it was very much like an advice column, is my point on the blog side of things. And so I think it kind of makes sense because then I think all I do every day, all day is give advice to people. Like that's really my role. So in those kind of initial conversations with a potential author, it's not me just having a conversation of like, let me calculate how I can sell them the maximum, the biggest product, the maximum ROI and things like that. It's like that is not my style at all. It's more of like, let's have a conversation. Let me figure out what you need and who is the right fit to
Mm.
help you, whether it's me or not. And so it's very like consultative in that way. And then when I'm talking to our authors, I'm giving them advice all day long. And so I feel like, and my book itself is also just filled with like tools and tips on how to do this on your own. So you don't need people. So I think I have this way of kind of synthesizing information to make it easier for people to understand. So I can go and consume a whole bunch of other more technical stuff and kind of like drill it down into a way that I can just say like, hey, John, go do this. And that way it kind of eliminates all the fluff and noise and makes it really actionable for you.
Yeah. No, and I'm somebody that appreciates that. I'm always looking for somebody who's already had like best practices, has gone through the
Mhm.
pains, understands it, can break it down, can simplify it just to those steps. So hey, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Jen, what does leadership mean to you?
So where my mind goes with that question is it's not a destination, but it's like a being. It's like a way of being and a way of showing up. I think again, this is just my own personal opinion.
Yeah, of course.
We've published a lot of leadership books. I think a lot of times people think of leadership as like this framework or this methodology or this model or this way that they can kind of like embrace being a leader in the workplace, for example, or embrace being a leader in a community. And I feel like that is good, but it's also how are you that person in all areas of your life? Like, how are you showing up for people in all facets, not just, I'm this really amazing leader in a corporate setting, but I'm this, I have absolutely no involvement in any other, area personally, or, I'm taking a back seat on all of these other things because it's just not like a through line in who you are. So to me, it's more about like, how can you just be that person who is naturally guiding and leading others rather than trying to find like this destination of like, I want to be known as like this specific type of
Yeah.
leader, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think from the people that I've worked with, when they found results, it was because they were able to look at themselves first and figure out who they were, what they wanted, live their values, right? All the buzzwords. But the point is mostly focused on themselves, being more who
Mhm.
they want to be, bringing that into the work. And then from there, people seeing that. It wasn't them working, like you said. I love the way you said that it's not a framework, it is more being. And that's absolutely right. I mean, we could look to the framework for things that we can refine and work on this and that, but it shouldn't be cookie cutter. It shouldn't be a script. For me, it always begins with that the self work. Jen,
Mhm.
can you go through some of the titles of your previous book before we jump into your book that we're going to discuss? Like, can you give some of those and just share what your past writings were?
Yeah, so the the one I will go back to from 2017, I had other books that came out in 20 between 2012 and 2017. All of those are taken off the internet because they were not my finest work, which is why now we know how to actually publish books because I made all the mistakes on my own. So those are
Thank
hidden.
you.
Yes. Yeah, I did the Lord's work on that one, really screwing up my own books. So, which I use in my when I teach other people. I'm like, "Listen, like I have made every mistake I'm telling you not to make. I've 100% done it myself."
You've
So,
lived it. You're not just out there kind of parroting
mhm,
what other people are saying, advice that's out there. You've lived it. You've gone through it. You've jumped into the fire.
totally.
It genuinely, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I've done it, and I even in my most recent book, I screwed that up too at points. So like it just we're human, right? But the one from 2017 is called Beyond the Rainbow, and so I was basically closing down my consulting business, my LGBTQ consulting business, moving into publishing full time, and I was like, I just have more things to say that I want to make sure that I can just get out there and use that book as like the book end. So I had other books, so that was four, like kind of a series of four books. That was like the end where I'm like, I've said everything I need to say. The other consultants can take the work and they can run with it from here. So that was kind of that book. And I still speak on that book every now and then. So I just actually had two speaking things in the last month or so, which were directly related to that book. So it's still doing its thing. It's living on beyond me, which was my point. Um, 2020, I wrote a memoir called House on Fire. And that is just my own personal story, which is both figuratively a house on fire and then also a literal house on fire. So that is I always give like a trigger warning because it's a really intense read, and I end up getting people who have read it and like reaching out to me of like, wow, that was a lot. And I wrote my memoir for two reasons. One, because I was tired of having like this albatross around my neck where I felt like my own story was suffocating me because of
Mhm.
just like kind of like having a pre and a post situation where I'm like, some people know me in this way, some people know me in this way. And it was just this constant trying to reconcile these two worlds colliding. And I was like, if I just write the story, then I don't have to worry anymore because I can say, just go read the book. I'll give you the book. I don't even care if I'm making money. Like, just take the books. So that way I don't have to explain myself. And then the second piece was I help people write and publish their memoirs. How can I help people write and publish their memoir without having done it myself? Whereas on
Mhm.
the nonfiction side, I've done it 6 times. Like that's, way easier, I think, in so many ways than a memoir, which is super intense. And so for me, it was like, I'm gonna really be raw in this because if I want that or I expect that from authors that we work with, I cannot take the easy path here. So that's why it's like very it's why I put the trigger warning there because it's really intense. And I did it that way on purpose because I wanted to show our authors, like, listen, if I can talk about this, you can talk about that. And so that came out in 2020. Timing wise wasn't the best because it was during COVID times, but that's also out there kind of doing its thing and helping people, which is my intent. And then my last one came out in October of last year in 2023. And that is the publisher purpose book, which was a long time coming, which was, I have so many different accessible resources on our website. We have tons of blogs, we have podcasts, I have interviews with our authors, I have a LinkedIn live show I do every month. We've got resources in every direction you can imagine, but I didn't have it in the form of a book. So I wanted to put it in the form of a book specifically so I can say, here, go take the book and go do whatever you need to do. You don't need to hire me. Like if you have the right skill sets, you can just take the book and have it as a blueprint and go off and do your thing. So that's really exciting because it was a long time coming. And so, and I also planned it so that way I had 2017, 2020, and 2023. So I have like this every 3-year cadence for releasing a book. So now I'm already thinking of like, what can I do in 2026?
So when it comes to this book, and it's like you said, a manual, you include anything where if anybody's motivated enough to do it by themselves, they can grab the book, step
Totally.
one through whatever, they can get it done. So what does that look like? How do you organize the book? You don't have to go through every chapter name, but are there sections of the book? What's that path that you lead the reader on?
Yeah, so it is. The subtitle is a step-by-step guide to write, publish, and grow your big idea. So I obviously have a visual. It's also behind me on the shelf.
Hmm.
Um, the way I did it is that my original intent, this is what I was saying, where I like also did it, shouldn't say did it wrong, but my goal was to write a 35,000 word book, because 35,000 words is about 150 pages. It's small, it's digestible, it's accessible. Readers love shorter books. Like there's data that shows that readers appreciate shorter books because we have a diminishing attention span. And so we want to capture them as quickly as we can, give them the solution, and have them see results and move on. The book is 68,000 words. So it took me twice the amount of space that I anticipated, because I couldn't find a way to break these three things apart. So it's mindset, writing, and publishing. So the writing and publishing seem like the obvious things, right? Like, so it's the writing aspect of it is, it's not how to use proper punctuation and grammar. That is not my strength. It is, how do I help you create a framework to be able to identify how many words your manuscript may want to be, and how do you come up with writing goals that will help you get to that word count? And then also giving information about, like, what does the editing process look like? What can you do from a self-editing standpoint to kind of set yourself up for success working with an editor later? So it's
Hmm.
all just tips around writing. It's really more about how to trick our brain into doing the thing that we know we need it to do, but we're just kind of stuck in our own way. So that's kind of like the writing section. So that could have been a standalone book in a way. But then there's the publishing section, which is everything you need to know about the industry. And it's not a historical look of what the industry is. It's not speaking ill of one sector, positive of another. It is very objective, where it's like, here are your publishing paths. What are your goals? And how do you find the right publishing path that is going to align with your goals? And so there's a bunch of chapters that kind of go through it, which also talks about censorship, like making sure you're
Yeah.
working with a publisher who's not going to censor your words, making sure you're working with a publisher or service provider that isn't a known kind of scamming entity of sorts. So it's all kind of the pieces that you need. And when I was doing the research of, like, what are the books in the market, there's a lot of books on how to write a book. I mean, tons of books on how to write a book. And there's a couple of books about publishing, but they're not comprehensive. They're much more like, here's how to get a traditional publishing deal, or here's how to self-publish. There's not a lot that kind of explains to the average person, what's the difference between the options that you have. So I was like, well, I can't just do the writing and not have the publishing attached to it.
Hmm.
And so I was like, all right, now that has to be both things. And I was like, well, I can't do any of this if the author doesn't have a clear vision on what they're trying to do. So the first part of the book is mindset. And mindset is, what is your personal, professional, business goals? What type of impact are you trying to create? What type of support systems do you need around you in order to help you actually create and make that impact that you're desiring? And then how does that all feed into the actual writing process and then your publishing plan? So I was not able to, like, actually pull apart these three concepts in any way to make the book any shorter. But because it ended up being, it's 292 pages, it is broken down in a lot of ways that have, I'll just give like an example, like just a lot of kind of visuals in them. So
Yeah.
that way it's not hard on the eyes. Like, it's written in a very, like, lots of subheadings, lots of lists, lots of white space. So that way you're not kind of reading it and being like, oh my God, this is so dense, I can't get through it. Like, there's a lot of like call out quotes just to give your eye
Okay.
like a minute to be like, okay, let me just like hear
Yeah,
what
where it's
you're
not just a
saying.
wall of ink looking at you, like page
It is
after
not.
page after page.
No,
Okay.
charts, graphs, lots of different colors. Yeah, because and one of the things too with this is that authors often think of books that way. They think of books that are just very dense, text heavy and dense,
Hmm.
which there's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly fine best practice. But what I wanted to do with this book was actually also show our authors what's possible. Because I think so often we kind of come into this where, like, we'll ask, like, what's your vision for what you want your book to look like? And a lot of times it's just a very clear, clean, simple, clear cut vision, which is, again, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of our books are just very, very kind of Times New Roman type of font, very standard, subheadings, very clean, because clean does work. But at the same time, if you want to be more creative, the
Hmm.
only way that we're not creative is when we're stopping ourselves from thinking about what it could look like. So I also designed it from that standpoint too, of how can I just show to somebody what is actually possible from a design standpoint of what their book can look like, and still be effective in telling the story and getting people, the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's amazing how you've put in that work. I love the fact that before you were saying, how can I help people with this writing memoirs if I haven't written one myself?
Mhm.
How can I encourage others, support others, guide others in writing a book if I haven't kind of shown them the kind of breakout that would be effective? So I like the way when something like that comes up, you're like, all right, let me just do it and show people that value and what it looks like on the paper, on the page.
Mhm. Yeah, and it goes back to that kind of intentionality. I think that's a word I use all the time with authors is that every decision just there has to be intentionality behind it. You could just pick a template out of a lineup. You might work with a company and they're like, "Here's 5 templates, pick one." You could do that, but why not take it a step further and say, "What do I really want? What do I really want to see and how might my reader want to see that? Or what does my reader want to see?" Like really going one step further than rather just kind of like taking things at a surface level. Which again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that we can be much more effective in engaging people when we do go one step further.
Yeah, yeah. And Jen, for you, obviously storyteller, obviously author, obviously writer, but where does that come from? If there's any place outside of being a writer, being an author, which is all about going deeper in your life, in your past, in your childhood, where does that is there some place in your past that kind of drives that need to tell that story, to dive deeper, to show that intentionality? Is there something from the past that helps elevate that portion of it, aside from, again, being an author, being a reader yourself?
Mm.
What is it? Where does that come from? Where does that storytelling part of you come from?
It's a really good question. My mind went to a couple of different places as you asked that. I think if we go back in time, I think a lot of people they have troubled pasts in whatever way. So whether that's troubled when they're in their 20s, a really rough childhood when they're 6, it could be literally any point that is not today past.
Mhm.
If I go back and look at what a shit show is usually the word I use lovingly, like a shit show, um, that my childhood was and this is why it's all in my memoir. There's a lot of big T trauma, little T trauma, a lot that was happening. But if I think about the thing that where my mind immediately went when you asked that question was, I didn't feel heard then. And I feel like I wasn't seen and I wasn't heard as a child. And so I feel like there has to be some part of me, and I've never really like thought about it from this perspective, but I feel like there has to be some part of me that is trying to just help other people feel seen and feel heard. And it doesn't always mean it is from a demographic standpoint or you know what I mean? Like it's like I think everyone wants to feel seen and wants to feel heard. I think that's like a universal kind of
Mhm.
need, right? But at the same time, I feel like that is a huge piece of where I always want our authors to be thinking about like how can your reader feel seen by the work that you're writing, especially in memoirs, right? Like what is your truth? What might be the reader's truth? And what's the universal truth? That whether
Mhm.
you've experienced this thing or not, what is the universal connecting that is going to get somebody where maybe they haven't experienced the specific thing, but they can sit back and be like, wow, I get that. Right. And it has to be written in a certain way to be able to have somebody have those kind of epiphanies or aha moments to be able to say, wow, I never looked at it that way, but I can completely see what that author is trying to tell me. And I think that that all kind of stems from a not feeling like I had a voice as a young person. If I had to take a stab at this right now, I feel like
No, that's
that's a piece
powerful.
of it.
Yeah, I put you on the spot with that one.
I like it though because it makes you think.
Yeah. And it is amazing how many people say that, like, even with their clients, even with their work, their business, whatever it may be. Yes, there may be the technical side to it, publisher, business owner, whether it's brick and mortar, whatever it may be. Um, but it's interesting how often you may talk to business owners and maybe they don't even think about it, but what they're trying to provide for others is that experience that they missed out on for themselves. Again, being seen, being heard, having certain experiences. So thank you for sharing that. I was always curious with you, with the intentionality that you put into it. There's the business side as the publisher, as the coach, whatever role it may be, to make sure that they're putting in their best. but I've seen you emote so much about it that that's not just a checkbox
Mhm.
coaching thing, that there's more behind that as to why you see that urgency and that need for that person. If they want, if they choose, if they have to ask
Mhm.
themselves to find out, what is it you really want to tell? It
Mhm.
just, it's interesting going from LinkedIn to having this series and seeing when somebody feeling that emotion in their voice, again, that urgency in their voice when
Mhm.
they, there's just something different about how they mean something, how they want something to play out for their clients, for their friends, whoever it may be. It's just
Mhm.
something that's very palpable. And I appreciate that about how you infuse that into everything you do in your work.
I think it just makes it easy because it's almost like a North Star. You don't have to think about it. It's like inherent in your being. When you can really figure out like what's that thing that's calling you and driving you,
Mm,
there's no longer a decision to be made. It's just like, well, obvious we're gonna it's gonna be this way. And what's interesting is I think this really drives a lot of how we identify who is going to be the best fit to work with us. Because I did say motivation before, which is a huge piece of it. But I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago that I was like, my intuition is saying absolutely not, red flags in every direction. And it wasn't even anything specific that they were saying. It was their energy I was picking up on, and then when I actually was skimming through the manuscript, I was like, this is exactly why my red flags were going off, because it was just so there was no bigger meaning behind what they were writing about. It was much more of like a slanderous memoir about someone who wronged them. And it's
mm,
like there are so many publishers, there are so many publishers out here. I mean, so many. Go find somebody else. Like we are absolutely not a right fit for you. Like it really needs to be that person who sees what's good for somebody else. And I think that our business model is so clean in that way, where publishing business models are not really clean. Where as a hybrid publisher, where it's like a pay for services model, like this is what your manuscript looks like, this is what the cost is going to be to publish your manuscript. It's very simple in that way. And I say that because if we're thinking about the cleanliness of it, my goal, like you're paying upfront for our services to produce the best quality book that we can collectively create. My motivation is not how can I get you as the author to buy more books because I'm marking them up and I'm making money on you, or
mhm,
how can I get you to focus all of your energy on selling books and not selling your individual coaching, or maybe you have a group group sessions that you do, or whatever it happens to be. That is, none of that matters, because it's about how to get your message out there, and the book is just one little piece of that bigger message. And I think it keeps things much cleaner, because there are so many publishers that have so many restrictions around how you can and can't use your book. So there's a lot of publishers, for example, that like if you want to give your books away, they won't let you. Or you'll have to buy, like if you want to give ebooks away, they'll be like, you can't do that. Or if you want to share, like a chapter of your audiobook to give to you on the podcast or something, they won't let you. Like there's so many restrictions. And it's like, it seems like such a disservice to people who are really just trying to find their person, or the person who's struggling with something that might be so niche narrow and nobody knows about. It might be something that impacts like a 0.5% of the population. But if you have an author who has a drive and a desire and ambition and motivation to find where that 0.5% of people are living, that's the type of impact that you want to make, not someone who's going to sell 1 million copies of their book, which of course is going to make an impact, but it
mhm,
might be helping that author find that really sub segment of people that maybe there's only a couple hundred people in the United States that experience this problem. It doesn't matter, because it's that couple of hundred people who are feeling seen and heard in a way that no one else has wanted to reach them, because it wasn't lucrative enough to try to
yeah.
reach that market. You know what I mean? Like that's where I feel like publishing goes wrong in so many ways.
When you gave that example of, you were talking to somebody, maybe a discovery call,
Mhm,
and it didn't feel right, and then you read through their manuscript, and that didn't, now that confirmed
mhm.
why it didn't feel right. When did you get to that point closer of your publishing career, or did it take some time to really say, this isn't the kind of approach that I want to take? No offense to you, but there are other publishers, however you put it to, did it get, did it take a certain amount of time to get to that point where you understood what you wanted and didn't want to help put out there? Or was it from the get-go that you knew? How
Yeah,
did that
that's
refine itself?
a big mistake. I will say that's how. So I don't know if I'm not going to go into human design, but if anyone listening knows what human design is, it's just basically, like to some degree, it's like how we're using our own energy. And for me, I know that listening to my intuition, listening to my spleen, listening to those gut instincts is imperative, which I already
Spleen.
knew. I already know.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is not new information. But in the context of business, there have been times in the past where my intuition is telling me it's a hard no, but I'm like, let me logically justify why I want to make an exception because I can see the potential in this person or I can see the potential in this project. And I had one person probably 4, maybe 5 years ago. It might be about 5 years ago at this point, where my intuition said no and I logically, rationally justified it. And it was an absolutely hellish experience internally as a company. And it's one thing when I make a decision that impacts me and only me,
Mm.
right? Because it's like, fine, I screwed myself over here, lesson learned, move on. It is another thing when it's directly impacting the mental health of people that work for me. And so it was one of these situations where it was like really dramatically impacting the mental health of one of our project managers. And so I had to intervene and be like, you are not allowed to speak to her this way in any way, shape, or form. And you are no longer allowed to communicate with this project manager. And it had to be like a really definitive because this author was so abusive. And
Mm.
that wasn't the vibe I picked up on. It was just my intuition saying no. And I had no, like, I didn't have a reason why it was saying no. It was just a clear no. So it was that day that I was like, if my intuition tells me no, I am not going to try to rationalize with my gut instincts. Like, they're saying this for a reason. I'm not going to do this again. Because again, if it only impacted me, it'd be fine. Because it's like, fine, I'm a masochist. Let me just keep torturing myself. Sure. But it's another thing when it's actually harming the people that are part of the company. And I cannot allow that to happen. So it was a really painful lesson, to say the least.
No, it makes sense though. Um, Jen, for you, what book has inspired you? I know we covered Fascinate at this point a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
But is there another book that jumps out to you? Maybe something you've read since then, something that jumps out that's really stood out and maybe impacted your work, your values, that's something that just is there, stays
So
with you.
hard.
And I know you read a lot.
I know. I should have come prepared because
Even if you have to give a couple examples, it doesn't have to be the number one definitive book.
yeah, there's just so many. What's interesting is that there's so many books that I read that, like, I'm fatigued from reading. I will just say that, which is probably no surprise since we're, working on books all day. And we're at almost 200 books published, and I do my best to read all of, like, read at least part of them, if not the whole thing. And so there's a number of even books that our authors have written that I'm like, wow, these are inspiring, but I can't really speak to them specifically because then I'm picking favorites, and I don't like to do that.
Mhm.
Um,
Understandable.
but I did just read a book that is completely unrelated to business that was called, that, like, really I feel like is impactful, which was called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew. And it was by Noah Tishby, who is a just a really well respected person who's out there doing a lot of thought leadership on what's happening between Israel and Palestine. And it was just really, really well done. And I'm like, this is such a good model for other authors to follow
Mm.
because it is talking about a really uncomfortable topic that is incredibly polarizing, that there is, mass chaos in so many different directions in so many parts of our country right now in this moment over Israel and Palestine. But she does it in such a way that is that you can follow, that she talks about the history of the conflict, that she talks about like what you can do in the present day to be supportive of people. And I was like, wow. And it was like remarkable. And it was a friend of mine who, like, I am her go-to person for all LGBTQ topics. She's my go-to person for Jewish topics. And so we've always had this relationship for like 15 years. And I was asking her a question. She's like, I really think you should read this book. I think it's going to answer so many more questions that you don't even know that you have yet. And I'm so grateful that she recommended that. So I've been recommending that book to everybody because I feel like it's one of those things that people want to weigh in on their opinions, but they're
Mm.
just afraid because they don't have enough information. And even after having read it, I feel like I still don't have enough information. But it was just really enlightening to kind of see how you can kind of take this massive topic that there's hundreds and thousands of books covering and put it into one succinct way that you can get people to like really understand the conflict from a different perspective, at least.
Yeah, I always appreciate those kind of insights where they take the reader into account and say there may be somebody that's going to read this that is the polar opposite of me. And I'm not writing this to defend what I am, but to kind of welcome them in,
Mhm.
answer any questions that may come up. Just because I think so many books that are about whatever issue it may be along those lines, it's very much this is what it is. That's it. And not too many of them are welcoming. You know, the masses of them aren't welcoming, and I think people do get discouraged from asking questions because they think they may be foolish questions, stupid questions, offensive questions. So I always appreciate those kind of voices that are just like, you know what, other people don't have the experience, the background that I have. They're curious as hell, but they just don't know where to start, where to begin.
Because you can't just, and I had this experience a lot when I was doing the LGBTQ consulting work that I was doing, where I was always like, ask me whatever questions on your mind, because I promise you, you cannot possibly offend me. I have literally heard everything. There's
Yeah,
truly nothing you're going to say that's going to upset me. But I
yeah,
can't speak on behalf of your neighbor.
of course,
Like,
of
you can't just
course.
go ask your neighbor any random question just because they happen to be the token person that you know of tokenism for anything, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to seek out those people where you're like, all right, I know this person's doing the work. I think I could probably ask this question. It's borderline inappropriate, but I don't really know where else to take it. The people exist. You just have to like do a little bit of research to
Yeah.
find them.
Yeah, I wish you could see who they were, or um just because they're I've attended forums, conversations for various topics, and the people that are on the, say, a panel come from different approaches to it. Some are very, various of the topics have painful histories,
Mhm.
painful stories. There's a lot of pain in there. Um, and then other people, such as yourself, are like, ask me anything, you know. Um, so I think there's such a value in that, especially nowadays.
Mhm.
Especially nowadays, it's just the norm of all these issues that are coming up that are fiery issues. Um, and all we see in kind of mainstream media is like this side or that side going against each other. So there,
Mhm.
when there are moments like that book that you've referenced, where we can educate each other open and honestly from the
Mhm.
mindset, I got to keep in mind this person that's asking me or whom I'm talking to, they don't have the same experience that I do. A lot of times it's kind of like, how dare you not have the same experience that I had? How dare you not understand that what you're asking is this or that? We just got to give each other some grace in terms of understanding that people's stories are different, and we have to be, even if you're curious about somebody, being respectful. But I hope more stories come out like that, more books come out like that, because I
Mhm.
think we're missing out on so much because we stay at that high level instead of having those honest face-to-face conversations.
Mhm. And I think having, trying to surround yourself with people that you can have these conversations with makes it, because, like, like attracts like. And so often we kind of stick in our own bubbles of people who have similar values and similar ideals, or we grew up the same way, or whatever it might be.
Mm.
But there's so much value in having somebody that's like a sparring partner. Like, I actually think of my partner and I of like sparring partners, because we could not think any more differently if we tried. And so she'll be coming from some extreme, I'm coming from another extreme, and we are duking it out in a still respectable way.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then we find out, like, oh wow, the issue that we're over here debating, I'm like just a hair this way and you're a hair this way. So what
Mhm.
started off as being something that seemed like it was a mile long divide is like maybe 10 feet tops. And so, but I think it's one of those things that, because we're in a safe space, that we can say the things and duke it out and really like listen to what the other person's saying, to be like, okay, I don't agree with you, but I see how you arrived at that conclusion.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think as a society we have enough relationships and enough people, because we're in this kind of society that which just kind of wants to divide us right now. Like, you don't like, there's not really a lot of room for people to be coming from different directions about any topic, to be able to say, maybe we should just try to duke it out and have a conversation here. Instead, it's like, you're right, you're right, I'm right, you're wrong. Like,
Yeah,
like, it's
yeah.
not productive. And so I think that's the beauty where books come back in, where like books can kind of provide that open space for you as a reader. Because if you're the author and you want to like really convey a topic, especially a sensitive topic, and you want the reader to feel like I'm not being belittled, I'm not being told that I'm stupid for asking this question.
Mhm.
I'm not told like, how dare you not know this already? Like that's where authors can really take that angle and say, listen, you might pick up this book and have not a single clue what I'm going to talk about, and that's okay. And just acknowledging like it's okay for you to be coming from a place of complete ignorance, even potentially. It's okay
Yeah.
because at the end of this, we're going to walk through this journey together, and my hope is that you're going to be empowered on the other side to make one better decision or advocate differently in one moment going forward. Like that's truly the goal. And I love books because you can't fight with somebody because you're reading a book. Like there's no
Yeah.
one to fight with other than in
I
your own
mean,
mind.
hell, even if somebody just picks the book up and starts reading it, that's a hell of a win because they're that
Great.
curious to begin reading. If they put it
Mhm.
down halfway through, okay, but just the fact that they picked it up is brilliant.
Mhm.
Um, Jen, in wrapping up, what are you up to these days? Is there anything that you want to share? Anything that you're working on? Anything you want to? Actually, I was going to ask you. You say like every 3 years is a book. So what are you thinking for 2026? Do you have an idea of what you want to write about?
I have this starting point of an idea. I don't fully know how to articulate, but I'll do my best. Is It is kind of like I was having a conversation with a friend maybe 2 months ago. And this book idea started before, but this direction kind of stemmed out of this conversation where she was talking about how her word of the year is fuckery. So she just wants to like get into fuckery. And I was like, my word of the year is experiment. So a little bit different angles, but kind of still the same idea, like just kind of like exploring things. And she's like, I think of myself as like, Winnie the Pooh and, Piglet just kind of like walking through the 100-acre forest and we're just, getting into things. And I was like, I feel like I'm behind you with a blowtorch and I've just wiped out 40 acres of the 100-acre forest because I feel, and to me, it's like this idea of like control burning your life, where we have to control burn forests to present,
Mhm.
to prevent, to create healthy growth, to prevent them from getting overcrowded, all the things. But I feel like we need to do that in our lives too. And so it is removing relationships that are no longer healthy, or maybe they're even toxic in some situations. It is really evaluating what you want from whatever the next iteration of your life is, and really being intentional about what that looks like instead of just saying like screw it. Because the original kind of working title I still don't have a working title, but what I was calling it before was an informed fuck it. So you're saying fuck it, but from an informed standpoint. And then it was like a midlife fuck it, where it's like your midlife, just fuck whatever it is, I'm going to find a different path. And so it's all still like under the same kind of umbrella of just really analyzing what's working for you and what's not working for you from like a personal and professional standpoint, and then just taking deliberate actions to kind of remove those factors or variables and bringing in the right ones for you in order to help you get to whatever the next stage of growth might look like.
Much in the way you write, you've written your previous books where you kind of go into why you're writing that book. You probably will go why into why you're writing the book.
Mhm.
But what were you don't have to give this store away, the unwritten store away, but what was it that kind of triggered that idea of a controlled burn? Like what?
I think was my memoir is called House on Fire. So where I don't know how I want to do this yet is, do I want to make this another memoir? Because I think a lot of times people think of memoirs and they think of like autobiographies, and memoirs are not
Mm,
autobiographies. An autobiography is life to death. No one wants to read that unless you're famous. A memoir is a theme. It's a slice in time. Like mine's from age 6 to 36. Like that is the point in time it's capturing. And so part of me is like, I could just make this a memoir. And then that would be thematically, it's like, okay, this was House on Fire, and now this is, something else with fire in it, or, some type of flame
yeah,
burn,
element or yeah.
yeah, connection to it. I'm like, or it could be a self-help book, which is much more action oriented, step by step, like here's how to kind of do this. But I think it just stemmed from turning 39 a number of years ago and just being like, fuck this. Why am I doing this? Like, why am I repeating this behavior? Why am I associating with this person? Why am I torturing myself when this is not enjoyable for me? And I had a couple of different situations that I was like, this isn't worth it anymore. And so I have been systematically cutting out friendships in my life for the last 4 years. And it doesn't mean it's easy. And a lot of times they're very painful. And sometimes they're like, oh my God, that feels like the weight of the world has been lifted. But at the same time, it's that controlled burn. It's like you have to
Yeah.
kind of eliminate some of these things that are dragging you down to make room for growth of something that's going to come in that's going to be better. Especially like I'm only, I'll be 44 on the 26th. And so
Happy birthday.
thank you. Appreciate it. And so it's like there's still so much, like there's so much life to live. And so it's like, why
Mm.
am I just going to keep repeating the same patterns that have not necessarily suited me well when I could think about how to do this differently? So that's, I don't really have a full concept here, but
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one because so many people put up with so much bullshit.
Mhm.
It's
It's like,
amazing just in talking to clients, talking to friends, to family, myself, that most times when we're stressed out or we're anxious or we're whatever, all of the feelings, it stems from most often something that we tolerate, something
mhm,
that we've put up with. So I think people need to get into that mindset of cleansing something or control burning something
mhm,
if it's not serving a purpose. And that there's,
mhm,
the world is just so big that you can go out and seek out who it is that can provide value. It's not about you just taking the value, but just having that symbiotic great energy. I think
mhm,
we realize it as we're older. I'm older than you, but there's just something about finding somebody with great energy, whatever
mhm.
the level of relationship may be, work, business, romantic, friendship, whatever, and just how you can just kind of feed off each other. Just good stuff. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be, it's not give or take or anything like that. It's just kind of natural. But yeah, I think it just comes to societal programming. You kind of put up with what's around you. So that I think that'll be an interesting read. That's awesome.
I think so. Yeah, I feel like something's there because I think we just these are always been the hobbies that I like. So this is what I do rather than being
Yeah,
like,
and I don't want to be a quitter.
yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
don't want to be. I don't want
let
to quit
people down.
my hobby. I don't want to quit on somebody. I don't want to walk away from somebody because then I'm the bad person. So we got to keep our toxic positivity around and be like, no, I'm going to make this work. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah, I just even think about like, what do I want as a hobby, right? Like, 'cause I have a son who will be a junior in high school. So the empty nest, it's approaching in the next couple of years. I'm like, what am I going to do with myself when I no longer have like him as like my primary, like I got to be the primary caretaker. And I'm like, what? And I have no interest in sailing, but what if I did, right? Like, what if I just wanted to start sailing? And it's like, who's to
it's the
stop me
shiny
from
things.
starting to sail, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, shiny objects are definitely part of this too. But I think we just like we're so like fixed mindset of like this is just what our day to day looks like. This is what I do. This is I wake up, I do this, I do this, I do everything is so repetitive and so habit.
yeah,
So like what if we just think differently about it? I don't
awesome.
know. We'll
No,
find
I'm
out.
looking forward to it. Listen,
Thank you.
even though you're in the working stages, I know it'll be great. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
And now, yeah, I wanted to jump to what you were writing for 2026 around there. And now I
Mhm.
want to ask you what you're up to these days. If there's anything that you want to share with this audience, any workshops coming up, projects coming up, anything you want, speaking engagements when you're out there, whatever it may be, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I definitely encourage folks to check out the book. And if there's an economic barrier in any way, you're happy to shoot me, go to our website. There's a contact form. You can send me an email. I'll happily give you the ebook for free. I always want to make sure that that resources are not a stopping point for folks in getting the information. We just started. So we've had our 6-month writing program. When I was mentioning the kind of the evolution before, this started in 2015. And so, we run that a couple of times a year, but it's an intense program. Like it's really like the goal is for you to actually get the thing written in 6 months with a lot of strategic guidance, with editing input, with knowing how the publishing works, et cetera, et cetera. We recognize that only works for a certain type of individual. And so we haven't really marketed this yet. So it's more of like you're kind of learning about it first. You're on our mailing list, so I'm sure you've seen information about it. But we started a weekly writing group that is called Write Your Purpose. And the focus is to just have a place for people to come to just sit and get the writing done, because the accountability piece is shockingly the biggest struggle that most people have when it comes to writing, is just having a place to come. So it's a weekly writing group. And then once a month, there's an office hour. So that way you're able to come and ask questions about the story that you're working on, to understand, some aspect of the process, looking for additional resources, whatever it might be. And so we're really excited, because I feel like it's been something that's been like the missing piece to our puzzle for a really long time, where it's like you kind of have like the book, which is very much, again, you can kind of take it and run with it, or you have like this really intense program and there's really not much in the middle. And so we finally have this something that is like that next step up from the book, and we're really, really excited about that. So anyone's welcome to check it out. And then we have a lot of free workshops that we do. I do a lot of stuff on Eventbrite. It's all on our website. Our website, I think, is still very easily navigatable. So if anyone's looking for any of that information, we have a kind of like the side bar menu, and you can kind of check out if it's publishing resources or writing. Because even though, we have writing programs and we're a book publisher, so it's the way that we frame things is a little bit different, because it's not just like, hey, go write the story, but not really understanding how it actually connects into how are you going to get it published, and how do you how do you actually do something with it? How do you make a bigger impact? Going back to impact. So that's...
No, I think all the work you're doing is amazing. Again, I love the regular series where you have the authors on, gives you that voice, lets that urgency and your intentionality coming through. So I appreciate that, Jenn. And again, Jenn's book is Publish Your Purpose, a step-by-step guide to write, publish, and grow your big idea. Jenn, thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it
so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to be the third guest. The third time guest.
Third time, absolutely. And if there's anything that I might have missed, we're short on time. I don't want to keep her here too long. Let me know, reach out, and I'll send Jenn an email, see what kind of wisdom, information, guidance I can get back. In the meantime, thank you for watching and listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.